Okay, and you're good to go, Gail.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. I'm Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President, and I want to thank our panelists. I'll introduce them in a minute. I want to thank everyone who is kind enough to join us tonight to talk about, I don't know, to me, it's the most beloved island. I love other islands. I love Roosevelt Island. But when you get off that ferry at Governor's Island, you really do feel you have left the busy and you are in the wilderness of beauty and openness. It's a very special place. And I want to thank everyone who has preserved it. I actually went to grad school with the last commander from the Coast Guard. And so I was there with him before it closed from the Coast Guard's perspective. And so here we are, January 20th, 2021. Before I start, I want to say what a day. I think many of us watched transition of power in the United States today. And the poet laureate, with all due respect to everyone else, certainly in my book, was the star of the day, not to mention everyone who got elected and made it possible. But it was quite a day in the United States today. So it's nice to be talking about Governor's Island tonight, because it too is part of our history in so many different ways. It certainly is a resource for New York City. And the reason we're here is, like I said, I have a lot of respect for the staff and the board of Governor's Island, but I just want to make sure that as we proceed to the non-historical portion of the island, that it's a development that enhances the existing assets. It's a place that preserves the island as a place for everyone. And of course, me being Gail Brewer, I'm always concerned about the height of future development. I know that's not the only criteria for anything, but something to pay attention to. And how whatever is built, how it does impact the rest of the island. I do support, as I think everyone does, Governor's Island being a year-round opportunity for New Yorkers. I think that's a fabulous thing. We love the ferry service. We love the fact that if you have a municipal ID like I do, you get on that ferry for free. I walk around with my municipal ID very proudly, so I don't have to pay the $2. And I think everybody should get a municipal ID. And obviously, it's free for housing authority residents, former military service members, seniors, and so on. Something to continue. I think the island and what is done with the artists has been phenomenal. The excitement of seeing the art in the admirals and other homes, not to mention just public art and the school, the Harbor School, which we love. Congratulations to everybody who's made that possible. And a lot of work has gone into it. And I know that in terms of camping, I know that it's open and will be continuing to be open to families of different economic means, and we're going to push that as much as possible. But there are lots of great free opportunities on the island. I know that the anybody planning is thinking about the flood risk. I know that that's always in everyone's mind, having lived through Sandy. And I know that the other challenge, of course, is making sure that there's enough money for the island into the future. Yeah, having been part of many rezonings, many parks, I constantly reminded, and it's an unfortunate situation that instead of the public paying for every park, which would be preferable, we are somehow stuck with, we have to find money privately or from development in order to sustain our particularly parks that have so much traffic. So I'm aware of that, and I know that even with certain plans, it would be a while before Governor's Island is sustainable. Of course, again, if we could find a way to pay for our parks with public dollars, it would be preferable. Same thing with the arts, for God's sake, like other countries. Again, a different story. I'm aware of that. So right now, there is a community engagement process that has been ongoing, because this is a ULURP application. And any RFPs for commercial tenants should allow input from Community Board 1 and the rest of Manhattan. And to the credit of Governor's Island, they have been doing that. And I know that the Community Board has been and will continue to be engaged with any future zoning changes. And I know obviously the ULURP process involves the Borough President, City Planning Commission, Community Board, and obviously the City Council and my colleague, Council Member Margaret Chin. So tonight is a supplement to all of that, or a complement to all of that, in terms of what is the best way that this island could be developed, given the fact that government doesn't have the money to do it the way that I would prefer. But I want to thank Claire Newman for joining us because she's the director of this fabulous island and the trust. And Claire, I know you wanted to give a presentation, and I really do appreciate your participation tonight. And I also appreciate the fact that you have briefed us and others on a regular basis. So the floor is yours, and thank you so much. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Claire. There you go.
Great.
Got it.
Thank you so much, Gail. Thanks for having us, and thanks to you and your team for putting this together. We think it's a fantastic event. Thank you to the panelists for what I'm sure will be a very lively discussion, and thanks for everyone in the public who's made the time to join on a, as Gail said, a very momentous day. We will try to keep this relatively brief so you can get to the interesting conversation. I'm Claire Newman. As Gail said, I'm the president of the Trust for Governors Island. We are a not-for-profit that was created in 2010 for the sole purpose of making Governors Island an extraordinary public resource for New York City residents, and really to think about how we could reintegrate this island that was closed to the public for so many decades and centuries back into the fabric of New York City. And really that has been made possible thanks to the work of many, many who came before me, and the work of the city and elected officials like the borough president, investing over $400 million into the island to build an award-winning, truly fabulous park amenity and bringing infrastructure back to the island. We are very lucky to have partners on the island across educational space, arts and culture space, and environmental space who have really helped to make the place what it is. We should note that the Harbor School, which is a public DOE high school, is on the island, and they provide educational pathways for New York City high school students focused on marine biology and maritime technology, so super relevant to tonight's conversation. Billion Oyster Project, Lower Manhattan Culture Council, the list goes on and on. And all of that has meant that we have, I think, made it back into the map of New York City. In 2019, we had close to 1 million visitors. I always like to say that I grew up in New York and I had never heard of, let alone been to Governor's Island, and you'd be hard pressed to find examples of that in the city today. So we are here tonight to really talk about our strategy for how to continue to advance this mission and continue to deliver on Governor's Island as a great public resource. And that strategy rests on 3 main pillars. First is open space and recreation. Of course, we have to continue to maintain the beautiful park. We can add amenities and recreational opportunities, field space, and we can expand it. Arts and culture has been at the heart and soul of what has made Governor's Island so special, and the fabric of the island lends itself to presentation of more public art. Working with island partners like LMCC, we've been able to expand residency programs. And then, of course, this idea that we can use this very special place with its iconic location and its unique ecology to hopefully add value to one of the deep challenges of our time, which is climate change. So in partnership with the mayor's office this fall, we announced a guiding vision for Governor's Island around the possibility of developing and attracting a global center for climate solutions to Governor's Island, really focused on the idea that we need to approach these challenges in a truly interdisciplinary way, bringing together the sort of quote unquote hard sciences, really integrated with social science, with arts and culture, and with public engagement in a place that can authentically lend itself to those activities. What we imagine that looking like on Governor's Island is a mix of uses, an educational or research anchor that again can really bring this interdisciplinary approach and use the fabric of the island as a way to engage with the public and provide points of entry into the topic and display new solutions. There's the potential for dorms and faculty housing, small scale convening and hospitality, commercial operations and innovation, but perhaps most exciting, the ability to embed all that in a living laboratory and cultural destination. For us, there's so many potential ways that this can help move the needle on the vital work that has to happen with respect to climate mitigation and also climate adaptation. And in particular, we draw attention to the possibility to create a real platform for research and innovation to use.
Claire, we lost you. Somebody, Michael, can you fix it?
And can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Okay, great. Um, you know, to make sure that equity and environmental justice are centered in all of this, working hard to leverage those partnerships that are on the island and really focus time on educational and workforce development pathways. A vision of how we can use the fabric of the island as well to help really test and display solutions in the existing landscape in the water and engage the public in that. Use it as a place where many different parties can come together and test ideas. A part of tonight's conversation, of course, is on the proposed rezoning that would help facilitate this vision. Um, we should take a moment to describe that this rezoning proposal is really vested in the master plan created by Governor's Island dating back to 2010, which identified, of course, the detailed plans to create this fabulous park and all the open space on the island, and earmarked these two development zones on either side for future mixed-use development to help bring 24/7 life to the island and help to create revenue streams to support the island. And these are the same zones that are under contemplation tonight. As part of this, the park itself was given primacy of place, and the designers took into account where best to position that to allow for real um, public enjoyment of the prime views. The rezoning proposal is sort of summarized here on this slide in interest of time, but what we're asking to do is extend the existing special district on the North Island to cover the whole island, which would allow a mix of uses consistent with a set of deed restrictions we have from the federal government, and the addition of small scale research and development to help support the climate solutions portion of the work. The whole center of the island, that is the park today, would be mapped open space, and no FAR would be generated there. And then in the two development zones, what we are proposing is allowing up to about 4.2 million square feet of development, which is an effective FAR of 3. And Gail, of course, flagged heights in her opening notes, and what we're proposing across the development zones range from 200 to 300-foot caps plus permitted obstructions. A little bit more detail of the map itself. As you can see, the North Island is already been rezoned. On the southern part of the island, the whole park plus additional areas of the park that have not yet been built would be mapped open space. And then these areas here, the western sub-area and eastern sub-area, again, consistent with the master plan, would generate floor area ratio and would allow this mix of uses. We spend a lot of time in partnership with our Community Advisory Council, different elected officials coming up with a list of urban design criteria. And those urban design criteria are reflected in the proposed zoning. We have opportunities and requirements, in fact, for breakthroughs and pathways through the space. Today, these areas are totally fenced off from the public. And a lot of thought went into visual connectivity between the water area and the upland portion of the park as well. There's a provision to create a new open space plaza here at Yankee Pier. And in total, there'd be at least another 6 acres of open space added to the southern portion of the island. A series of renderings that really were created with the intent of taking the zoning envelope and showing how this vision around a climate solution center could fill it. What it could potentially look like at Fill Build, a vision here of what coming off Yankee Pier Plaza, a new institution could look like, activating the historic district year round. And again, showing too how the island itself and the park will mature and be framed by these identified development zones. So, you know, at its heart and soul, this is really about a proposal to help create year-round activity on the island, to expand public access, and a comprehensive and mission-driven vision that we believe complements and enhances the island's existing character by focusing on activities that are unique to this waterfront location. In terms of next steps, as Gail said, we are continuing to go through the public engagement process. Of course, we've heard a lot of feedback via ULURP to date. We're continuing to work on those comments and think about how to make adjustments. We take this stuff obviously very seriously, and part of tonight's purpose of tonight is to hear further feedback. And we're also engaging around this future RFP. We are in this rezoning process, as everybody knows, and then the goal is to release a solicitation focused on this climate center vision at some point this calendar year. So Gail, let me thank you again for the opportunity to just share the high level overview and turn it back to your agenda.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I just want to mention, in terms of what I mentioned earlier, to add to it, of course, there's no residential. That's part of the deal with the island, in case anybody brings that up. I know that building looked tall. I don't want to hear about it right now. We can talk about it later, because I know exactly how my constituents think. And I also want to mention ball fields. To the credit of the trust, they have indicated that they are really looking at ball fields in terms of a support mechanism for the great high schools and leagues, local youth leagues, and also garden and composting. You mentioned that in your presentation. I thank you, Claire, for that also. All right, so we've got a great panel, and they should feel free to ask each other questions and bring up topics that you think are relevant. Ernest Halson serves on the board of the Hudson River Foundation, which funds basic and applied scientific research. He was a trustee of the Nathan Cummings Foundation, focusing on climate and inequality and the intersection of those issues. He's a former director of the Environmental Sustaining and Compliance at the MTA. I think that's maybe where we first met. He was a beloved member of the MTA. That's hard to be a beloved member of the MTA. He was also, for many years, a reporter and editor, Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Newsday with my friend Sylvia. And he was editor of the editorial and op-ed pages and the New York Times, where he was a national correspondent and later a member of the editorial board. He's on the boards now of the Environmental Grantmakers Association, Environmental Advocates, the South Street Seaport Museum, and also the New York Historical Society. Lila Shapiro is Executive Director of Artistic Programs at Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. I mentioned the issue of art in terms of Governor's Island, and LMCC has done beyond phenomenal job of working to provide space and artists for the Governor's Island. It's something beyond special. She oversees the residency and re-granting program, the public programs. We all know River to River. Pre-COVID, it was fabulous. And even during COVID, I know you did a great job. And before that, she was at the French Institute Alliance Française, and she curated and founded the Crossing the Line Festival. So she has a long history of working in live arts as well as the arts that fill the great galleries of Governor's Island. Claire Weiss and I, just so you know, if you go on, I'll tell you more about her, but we pulled off something very special, much thanks to Claire, this past summer during the worst of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter murals. And if you go to Center Street, between Worth Street and Chambers, you will see, I think, with all due respect to all the other Black Lives Matter murals, one of the best. And Cultural Affairs of the City of New York found 3 phenomenal artists, and then 20 graphic artists painted it, along with high school students from the East Harlem. It's really, really special. And those car tires have not destroyed it. Much thanks to Claire. She can talk about that if she wants. With her team and staff, they really pulled it off. We all worked together. She's an architect and an urbanist and the founding principal of WXY. She focuses on innovative approaches to public space. But really what she does is when you're in a mess, like we have been in open space with restaurants, you call Claire Weiss and she is able to work with the bureaucracy to get something pulled off. She's hard to describe. WXY received the lead prize from the Architectural League of New York. It's been selected for the League's Emergency Voices. In addition to so many awards, she has from the AIA, from American Planning Association. She has been involved, it seems to me, with so many different aspects of New York City. The Spring Street Sanitation Garage is a model, the redesign of Rockaway Boulevards, Pier 26 Boathouse, and the list goes on. It's somebody who cares deeply about the city. And then she'll even call me and say, there's too many cars parking on the street, Gail. Would you please do something about it? I love people who care about those things. To me, that's really, really impressive. Marcel Negrete is a senior planner at RPA, Regional Plan Association. He provides technical expertise and research capabilities to RPA planning and advocacy efforts. Prior to that, he was a project manager at the Municipal Art Society. He helped inform positions regarding citywide policies and precedent on land use decisions, which to me is the hardest topic in the world. He has expertise in storm water infrastructure, and he has worked with community boards in the Bronx. Really important. Sarah Doherty is a senior program manager for Waterfront Alliance, and she contributes to many aspects of this organization. She's an expert in resilient design. She promotes accessibility, human health, topics that are certainly important to the island. She has worked in international development with the Resource Institute Sustainable Cities team. She has worked with an Indonesian organization called Kata Kita. I never leave Manhattan, so I'm really impressed, Sarah, that you actually know something outside of our borough. I'm really terrible about that. So this is an amazing panel. I think we'll start with you, Ernest, if you don't mind, and just talk about what you think should be the future of this island, given your phenomenal background, and whether, are there some ways, despite the great work that Claire Newman and others have done, are there other ways in which you think this island could be a place for all New Yorkers to participate and visit?
Sure. Well, first of all, Gail, thanks for that generous introduction. And like you, the experience of being on the island is often beyond words. Except for the Bronx, which is on the mainland, we're an island people. Except you don't have the experience of an island, right?
Yep.
The way that the city's developed. So when it comes to thinking about this rezoning on the southern end, I'm struck by the fact that Philadelphia used to have a rule that said you couldn't build anything taller than Ben Franklin's hat. Mm-hmm. Obviously, because of the way DC was designed, it was designed to intimidate other foreign capitals and nations. Nothing's going to be a tower over the Washington Monument. And so I think for Governor's Island, we need a kind of standard for just what's the sort of the scale of development that leaves the island an island. Maybe it might be the McKim, Mean and White's Liggett Hall, right? The Georgian Revival Barracks, right? I think it might also be known as Building 400. So I just throw that out as an example. I'm not wedded to that, but you need something that's a standard for sort of the height and density. And then when it comes to rezoning, you want to rezone the sort of southern area of the island without interrupting vistas, I think at all, to have the experience throughout the island. And if you see the island as every New Yorker's birthright, then you want to be very, very careful about how you do it. So I think that the rezoning exercise that's going on now could benefit from another look at places that have successfully managed to fit commercial and nonprofit redevelopment into the landscape without damaging the landscape, swamping it, or obscuring it. So when I think about that, I think about trying to find comparable situations and opportunities. And I would direct your attention to places like the development at Asilomar and the Monterey Peninsula in California. I would look at the way Mohonk is tucked into the Shawangunk. You look at the low-rise development around the Grand Tetons in Wyoming. But essentially, you want to preserve the ability of New Yorkers and visitors to connect with nature, the Straits of Long Island Sound that we call the East River Channel, the bottom of the estuary, one of the greatest harbors in the world, and the various vistas. And you don't want the drive to find revenue for both recurring revenue for the operating budget and the capital budget to swamp the way the island looks and feels and how people experience it. And the other thing is if there is a deep interest in a kind of climate center, an interdisciplinary climate center, it would kind of in a sense to me, contradict or in a way violate the ends of that center if you have development in the island that's not really sustainable. This is not the place for, replicating little parts of Hudson Yards and Battery Park City and all of that. This is a great opportunity to figure out, ecotourism for New Yorkers. It's also a great opportunity to partner with the schools, whether they're public schools or independent schools, figure out how do you give every school-aged kid in New York in different age bands, whether it's middle school or high school, an experience on the island that fits in with some area of their education that they're excited with. So those are the things that are kind of top of mind for me for the when it comes to the rezoning.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. Lily, go ahead in terms of the art and how that fits in and what you think the island should look like.
Thank you so much, Gail. And thank you for always bringing the arts into the conversation. Certainly LMCC, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, has been one of the first permanent tenants on the island since 2010. And we saw how extraordinary a sanctuary it is. And as you said, Gail, such a special, one of the most incredible island. And so for so many artists that we've been able to support over the years, we've seen the incredible benefit of working on the island, but also being able to welcome increased attendees and New Yorkers into the island, into the Art Center, and really seeing over the years Governor's Island becoming a real destination for New Yorkers. We're enthusiastic about the plan, and that for the principle behind the accessibility of visitors year-round. This is a really important aspect, which at the moment, obviously being open to the public 6 months out of the year, is not quite, there's not quite yet the possibility of really develop programmatically fully to the extent in which it can and to its full potential. What we also delight in the plan is the accessibility and affordability to all New Yorkers that comes with the financial sustainability. And so that is also another aspect that we really truly treasure about the experience of the island. And then the plan also offers greater visibility for arts and culture, and it's really one of the three main aspects of the plan. So from that standpoint, and from a standpoint of arts and culture, it's a plan that we feel very excited by. And as you've said already around being a center for climate solutions and being incredibly innovative, it's so close to New York, and yet being in this very special location where it's a sanctuary for new ideas around this absolutely essential topic of tomorrow. And so for arts and culture and for artists to be potentially in conversation with scientists and being in residency and incubate new thinking in conversation with many. And certainly there's been such incredible tenants over the years, specifically in this area. Ernst, you talked about the Harbor School, and then we can talk about Grow NYC and so many Climate Museum currently. So there's already such great history in only just a little over 10 years around this real inquiry around climate solution that we feel very excited by the plan forward.
So how would the art and the climate fit in? They do go together conceptually, but how do you see them going together, in terms of that climate issue?
Yeah, we've always seen, artists are as incredible guides for our societies in the ways in which they are our moral compass in so many different ways. They are also helping us think about new ways and new models and new bringing new ideas to the public. And so that possibility for artists to be working on question of sustainability and ecology is very exciting. At the Art Center, on Governor's Island, this has really been one area of inquiry and that we're developing even further. So to give you an example, Gail, when we opened the Art Center after the major renovation in September of 2019, we've invited the artist Ito Barada, and she had been looking and sourcing a lot of plants and vegetations from the island, and then creating this incredible artwork around connecting it back into the island. And so there's so many different ways of bringing to the public new ways of thinking, of connecting to the earth, of connecting to the context. And that's just one example out of many more examples that can be incredibly hyper local and pertaining to the island itself, but also creating new models and new thinking around ecology and sustainability for the future.
Claire's all yours. When in trouble, call Claire Weiss. That's my motto in life. And we need help. Go ahead, Claire Weiss.
Just kind of building on the kind of feelings and facts everyone's talking about the fact that Governor's Island is nowhere else, right? It's the prow of not Hong Kong, which also Hong Kong used to be a low-rise city. It turned into a pretty high-rise city, but it's the prow of New York. I mean, it's right at Atlantic Avenue. It's literally, we hope one of these days, pretty easy way of access from Lower Manhattan, but it's very close. Lower Manhattan is like the history of New York in one place. There's a grid, there's not a grid. There was a canal, but Governor's Island is completely surrounded by water. So from a climate action point of view, I look at it that this is not the word center isn't about a building. The word center is about Governor's Island itself, because it's one, and what I like about what's happened, whether it's the Billion Oyster Project, the Harbor School, or what LMCC is doing, there is a spirit of experimentation, or even the play yard, that doesn't happen anywhere else in the city. And so ultimately, it's not about doing things the same way. I think one of the key questions is, how does one attract and the resources to continue the experiment, but also attract people from every borough, because Governor's Island is at the center of the harbor, to see things they can't see in their own neighborhoods or downtowns because the market won't allow it, or people are living there and they can't do it, or someone can, it seems to me that Governor's Island has a capacity to take on the mission of climate action, and in a way can show models of things, and also allows, just way bigger creativity. There's always a reason why you can't do something. And for me, Governor's Island may be a reason you can do something.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Marcel, thank you for joining us. Thank you. I can't tease you like I can everybody else because I don't know you as well, but thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can elaborate on how Governor's Island and the current proposal fits into the regional vision and what RPA has articulated in the past. So in order to implement solutions that address the existential challenge that climate change is presenting to us, we need a space where thinkers, researchers, both from the private and public sectors, policy experts, and the community at large, including artists, can convene to explore and debate and train themselves to further evolve and materialize these ideas. The fourth regional plan, which is a plan that the RPA issues every generation or so, which was last released in 2017, articulated the need for the tri-state area to rise to the challenge of climate change. And so among many ideas, this included kind of three general categories: creating new institutions and funding to tackle climate change. And so this is talking about things like cap and trade programs and establishing a regional coastal commission. A second bucket has to do with learning how to adapt to our changing coastlines. And this has to do with figuring out physical ways on how to protect densely populated communities, transitioning away from places that can't be really protected, and other ideas, such as studying the benefits of a regional surge barrier, And the last component of that has to do with creating a greener energy system that will also provide more capacity. And so that has to do with things like modernizing the electric grid, scale up renewals, managing demand with energy efficient buildings and variable pricing and all those things. The reason why I itemize all these ideas is to give you a sense of how challenging are the issues that we're facing. And so while the region already has some great institutions that are advancing components of these elements or issues, we ought to have a dedicated anchor institution that brings them all together in a same physical space. And I want to underscore the importance of making this accessible to the public so that they're part of these debates, they're part of these explorations, and their voices heard on how that might be evolving, but also ultimately facilitate, I think importantly, workforce training programs to ensure that the next generation of New Yorkers are equipped to be part of this nascent climate adaptation industry. And so I think Governor's Island is uniquely posed to offer these opportunities, and we need to take advantage of them.
Okay, thank you, Marcel. Now, I know you know South America also very well. Is it possible to do all this without such a tall building? I'm not just saying from Gail Brewer's perspective. I know how the public is, and I know how my constituents are, because they write me about every friggin' topic under the sun. Is it possible, do you think, to do this? I mean, is it a financial issue? Do you think people worry about that? Do you have any comment on that? Because that is one of the issues. I don't think anybody disagrees with the concept of a climate-focused, many people input in terms of that topic. But, you have a long history. Do you think it's possible to do that with a building that's not so tall? I know that's a direct question.
Well, I mean, what I would say about that is what RPA in our testimony that we delivered earlier in the ULIP process is to be wary of emphasizing an overly set of prescriptive rules that would undermine the intention of securing this institution. So,
Okay.
and let me be clear. I've been in a position before where I've been critical about the impacts of tall buildings or overly dense buildings, and that what the implications that may have on shadows and visual resources. But in this case, I think it's the importance of securing a climate anchor institution that is facilitating solutions to all these issues might supersede the concern over having some visual resources being impacted to a degree.
Okay, Claire, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add.
And then I'll call on you, Sarah. Don't forget.
I was going to add to that, which is uniformity. And I've seen some comments about terraces, that buildings right now are not designed to actually help create microclimates or to actually, although there's some experiments in South America to create buildings that create microclimates. And in a lot of ways, having these big floor plates doesn't actually help with ventilation. It doesn't self-shade. So it's not really, for me, I'm not questioning what height it is, but to have the flexibility or the demands on buildings to actually be about climate forward and experimentation and to prove their worth, they require some flexibility.
Okay, that's helpful. Sarah, all yours.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and that was a great segue, Claire, so thanks for that. I think a lot of the things that have been raised, Ernest, just the point about making sure that we're reconnecting with nature in our waterways, also that we're leading by example through resilient design, I think is super important. So I think I'm from the Waterfront Alliance, and I lead our Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, or WEDGE program, which is similar to the LEED rating system in that we're shifting the market towards more resilient, sustainable, and accessible waterfront development. And what we really want to see is that the Climate Center and the design of any buildings, but also the open space and specifically the waterfront edge is really adjusted to future sea level rise and climate change considerations. And that's not currently required by zoning or the city of New York. And WEDGE is a standard for dealing with the reality that almost all of Governor's Island is currently under the 100-year floodplain, but looking at the floodplain through the 2080s, when these buildings will still be in their design life, the flood elevation could be as high as 15 feet. So I think we said in our testimony, we were really focused on the design flood elevation, which also sort of links to some of the, I think, concerns of Community Board 1, but we'd really like to see that be raised. That doesn't necessarily mean that all buildings get jumped many, many feet off the ground. It also means incorporating nature-based resiliency solutions like living shorelines and berms, and making sure that the approach is flexible. I think the renderings that we saw that WXY did of cutting back into the shoreline and mimicking the natural shoreline and sort of creating more gradual slopes is really appealing and something we hope to see, because we as a city and a nation don't really design shorelines that well. There's a lot left to be desired. So the opportunity to actually touch the water and experience the waterfront as it would have looked in pre-colonial times would be a really great asset and experiential learning for designers and also for students and a climate design leader.
Well, thank you. I know this is irrelevant, but there's a little beach which Waterfront Alliance knows well. It's called the Brooklyn Bridge Beach. It's actually on the Manhattan side, and EDC, Economic Development Corporation, wanted to put like a high pier and then you could look at the water. I had a fit, and I convinced Margaret Chin to take back her money and my money if in fact that wasn't going to be a beach where you could go touch the water. And we won. We're very excited. So thank you for talking about shorelines, because I feel very strongly about it. Ernest, there's a couple of questions. First of all, your comments as usual are phenomenal, but even beyond the design, what do you think should be, is there something about the open space in general, given your vast experience, that should be protected and should be allowed or should be prohibited in addition to the buildings? That's a, you know, there is quite a bit of open space there. And I just didn't know if you thought something, you know, something unique about it. And also just Claire and others talks about this flexibility, and I don't know what exactly that means. I didn't know if you want to comment on what should be flexible or what exactly it means. Those are my two questions.
Sure. So I like the idea of flexibility. It's sort of hard to conceptualize giving all that power to the Climate Institute to figure everything out. I mean, that kind of depends on, they're doing the right things, given whatever your views are on trying to sort of run things in a sustainable way across the energy footprint, the various things you want to look at if you want to be sustainable in the age of a climate emergency. So an anchor institution, they're fine. They're having the power to work everything out. It strikes me as a little scary. So then I think about the residents of the 5 boroughs, and then just for various reasons, you know, you have 2 boroughs that are very close to the island, obviously Brooklyn and Manhattan. I really think we owe the kids and families of New York the ability to experience this island, right? And you know, why couldn't we have yurts in season all over the place, right? Because when it's not in season, you take them down. You got a storm, right? You got a westerly facing hurricane in the fall. You don't have to worry because they're yurts, you're taking them down. But it just seems to me we ought to be thinking of ecotourism and ways to make the island accessible to more and more New Yorkers to have an experience. I mean, the ability to go to an island where you don't have to jump on an airplane at JFK, you know, and spew a lot of carbon getting somewhere, when you can just take a subway and a ferry and you're on this island. I mean, it's you know, it's a really kind of neat carbon, you know, sort of carbon smart solution. So how do we figure out how to give individuals and families ways to experience this island, and particularly school kids ways to connect some some particular subject that they're passionate about, with some stay on the island. And, you know, I could see, in partnership with the city schools, designing, you know, a Governor's Island semester for kids in different age bands with different kinds of subjects. I mean, it's great that the harbor school's there, but it's just one, you know, it's one school. We're not having an impact on the school kids of New York.
Yeah. I couldn't agree. Anybody can jump in. I think the idea is, how do we make it accessible in the broadest sense? How do we make it affordable in the broadest sense? And sometimes, and then of course, how do you weave in the climate issues? I don't think it's hard to weave in the climate issues, but I worry that they wouldn't necessarily be accessible to New Yorkers, or, you know, that they will be affordable. If you do a university, which is one possibility, that's fine. But again, is it CUNY, you know, or, you know, what is it?
Well,
Anybody want to go ahead, Ernest? I worry about those
we
things.
all know, for instance, that Columbia is eager to create a really first-class climate school. You know, how is the trust going to process the issue of picking either a lead academic institution among other institutions, or a consortium of academic institutions to run a climate center? I mean, how is that going to work?
Right, so anybody could jump in. I'm worried. I'm sure NYU and Columbia would love to do this. I always say it has to be CUNY, but then you know, that's Gail talking. But feel free to jump in about, you know, how does this work with the hotel, with the university, and so on. So feel free to jump in.
I might just
Go ahead. Sarah, go ahead, and then Marcel, go ahead.
Just to reiterate, along the perimeter of Governor's Island is over 2 miles, and I think there's currently one direct access point at Pier 101. So Waterfront Alliance actually has a maritime activation plan that identifies different possible touch points along the waterfront, and that's you know, co-benefits of more resilient shorelines, and also opportunities for programming and stewardship, kayaking, different recreational activities. So I think that just the ability to touch the water really hits those notes of affordability, programming, and resilience.
Okay, Marcel, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll go quickly. I just want to give a quick historical reminder. New Yorkers already had a comparable debate about the programming and the uses that would allow supporting the island to continue to be publicly accessible. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, the Governor's Island Alliance had a series of workshops and design charrettes. Actually, some of these reports that documented what was discussed and concluded back then, you can find in RPA's website. And so I think back then, the coalition recognized that the redevelopment of Governor's Island poses an extraordinary opportunity, but also a challenge. And so it was understood that there was a need to find uses that would generate revenue to maintain the island as a whole, including the bulkhead, the piers, the ferry system, and other infrastructure. Every meeting that I've attended from the Trust for the Governor's Island, they reiterate that they operate almost as a city in itself. And so that is costly, and that money needs to come from somewhere. And so back then, the potential uses and activities that were identified by the coalition were grouped in 4 reinforcing program streams or clusters. The first one, and the most important, was education and institution. It also involved arts and culture, parks and recreation, and a conference center. So even though that the specific floor areas were not breaking down back then, I think a lot of that is reflected in the current proposal. And it feels that it was concluded back then, and I'm hopeful that we will conclude that again throughout this public review process.
Okay. I mean, you know, because of New Yorkers are skeptical, as you know, and you know, people have had a lot of challenges in terms of development now. So they're worried that, will this really be a climate center? You know, will it become too privatized? So Claire, how do you address all those issues? Because people are nervous that it's going to be something that is not accessible to them. And right now it's such an accessible place. So you think it's possible to do the development and then still keep it accessible? That's the question that
Well, I think what's key, I get back to the public space. Right now, people wander through the park space. I
Yeah.
know because I live in Community Board 1. I bike. I know how fast or slow I can bike around the Esplanade. And the truth is, it's hard right now because of the blocked off zones. But if you imagine the fact that you want to have the opposite of a gated community or a gated area, that it's going to be really important, the spaces between buildings and areas. So like, I know that it was mentioned, like one of the things I focused on was that idea of maritime jobs and job training, because it's very hard to do in other places in the city. And I can imagine taking a boat to work from Red Hook, other places, or to school, to be able to actually have some kind of focus on the kinds of like structures in water, floating structures, other things. So then you're going to have people wanting to bike right through there, right? So I do think it's really important that the coexistence of this, all season, different functions actually works with the fact that the entire Governor's Island wants to be basically accessible by public space. So one thing I've noticed in COVID is that I used to think, oh, why is there 2 or 3 paths, where there's Marginal Street in Battery Park City, where there's the Hudson River Park, then there's Marginal Street, and now there's West Thames Bridge. And I've noticed under COVID that actually it's better to have more than one path. So that things like that, I think we're learning right now, and could be in terms of like what Sarah was talking about, how we look at edges now.
Yeah.
Maybe we have to look at having enough layers in edges and layers in paths that's what I kind of mean by flexibility, Ernest, is that I think you actually have to build a little bit more capacity into things.
Okay. Anybody can jump in. Yeah, the question, of course, is from the public. Some of them is, can the private be built and then we don't lose the public space and the public access and the public affordability? And there's a lot of fear of that, as you know. And I don't know if anybody wants to comment. Ernest, how do you, we do the hotels, and so how do we do that? It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, the fear is justified. We have plenty of examples in the city of kind of the architecture, geography of nowhere getting planted down, just because some real estate developer was able to do it, right? And so one of the key questions is how to defend against that on an asset like Governor's Island, right? How do you ensure that the rules of the road that you come up with prevent the geography of nowhere from popping up? So I'm Gail, like you, I've been around a while. So in the 90s, in the days when Monahan was trying to convey the island to the city for $1, and it got tied up in all sorts of politics. And I was on the Times editorial board at the time, and wrote about this issue on behalf of the board. We would deliberate and reach a position. At the time, we were fighting off things like, the Danish amusement park development.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Gardens. So for each generation, this island poses the question of how do you avoid the redevelopment of nowhere, and it's never guaranteed. New Yorkers can always be outfoxed by market forces, and we don't want that to happen here.
Yeah, it is the last, at least probably left, and there's certainly Manhattan, and maybe not elsewhere. But the other question, of course, is just the resiliency question. And I know, Sarah, you touched on it, but you want to talk a little bit more about what real resiliency could look like on Governor's Island?
Sure, and feel free to jump in. I think there are others that can talk about it too, but just one note I want to say about flexibility and Claire's point about realizing that the uses of pathways during COVID made me think of this, but I think COVID will change in the short term and maybe even the long term how education and meetings work. So the idea that there might be more virtual classrooms and that sort of thing in the coming years might affect the programming and planning of the built spaces on the island. And then in terms of resiliency, I think this is obviously a very vulnerable place. It's in the cradle of a dynamic estuary with lots of strong currents. And so designing wetlands and living shorelines is a challenge. And so I think we'd want to see more advanced modeling taken on to make sure that those designs can survive, but also just to try to make sure that whatever the plans are, future sea level rise conditions, which could be as much as 6 feet by the end of the century, are taken into consideration. And that comes into things like the base plane of how high or where the design flood elevation of the first floor of buildings is. But it also comes into consideration with things like species selection of plants and green infrastructure, making sure that stormwater capture is not just capturing current precipitation, but is flexible and can adapt over time. So we're of course, I'm biased. We're hoping that the project goes through formal wedge review to make sure it meets the high standard. But at the very least, using wedge as a framework and working with city planning and the community board to make sure that its future risk focus is key.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in? Marcel, you have a lot of expertise here too, I know. You know, resilient I know people are complaining that looks like the buildings are too close to the water. You know, New Yorkers will come up with everything and anything. But I didn't know from your perspective what a really good resiliency plan would look like, Marcel.
I mean, I would also, going back to the question around flexibility,
Yes.
if the intention is to explore different construction typologies and some of the ideas that Sarah was explaining, again, I would advise against an overly set of prescriptive zoning requirements that may go against that intention. And there's, of course, I get the point of being overly cautious about, you know, the real estate pressures outsmarting some of the things that we want to see from a public perspective. And but there's other mechanisms that go beyond the zoning discussion, right? There's a request for proposal that will be part of how the trust is selecting who the anchor institution will be. And so I think that's another venue in which a lot of these controls, I guess, and requirements could be written and secured so that we ensure that this remains to be a public benefit and for all New Yorkers, and not just, you know, being captured by the interests of real estate pressures.
Okay. Lily, we didn't ask you a lot of questions because everybody loves artists. They just don't love development, just so you know. So we love artists. Artists are the key and the backbone and the everything of our city. So I just want to let you know that's the only reason you're not getting slammed with these questions. The artists are beloved. They don't have any negative at all. So I just want to let you know.
Maybe I just wanted to say something about just a comment on the, you know, the notion of flexibility, but there's also something that comes to mind. It's also the fluidity between the northern and the southern part, and I appreciate very much, Claire, your point of these different paths and creating this possibility of access, which is so important. But I do see within that possibility of fluidity between the northern and the southern part, and all the public engagement and the art and the connector. And there are, again, already these tenants that have been on the island for over 10 years and that have created this community, which is very, very strong actually on the island. And so the access of the possibility of living that community year round is something that is really important. So I would add to flexibility, fluidity.
Okay. Well, the good news too is I think the trust is considering this. We want Community Board 1, I think you'll appreciate this, to be an equal partner. We haven't been successful, but we're working on it in any selection of the RFP winner or how that process goes along. Because I think having them involved in a very real way would make a difference. It has not been done before, so it would be a first, but I am pushing that hard. And I think that would give people some feeling of trust in terms of the process, to have them be part of the selection, the writing of the RFP and the selection. That would make a big difference. So it is 7 o'clock, and I think we promised that we would let people from the public speak. And so I want to thank our panel. You're welcome to stay and ask questions or listen to the public. And I can't thank you enough, because we didn't get all the questions that people have asked us, but we are going to work on them, put together, and as part of the process, ongoing process, they will get answered. So thank you all very much. Again, you're welcome to keep, but Michael Nichols, do you want to go and let the public in, and we will start listening to questions?
Sure, I'm going to allow participants now to raise hands. So if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, just once it's allowed, press the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen, and I'll call on you.
Okay.
So you should be able to do that now. Okay, so first I have Anne Seligman. I'm going to allow you to talk now.
There's 2 minutes, so you know, and then do you have a second person who will be ready?
Yes, I have a whole list of people already.
Okay, so Anne, go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much for this presentation. It's been super interesting and I'm glad to hear it. My two concerns, one are, Borough President, you already referred to this and I didn't hear a great answer as to how you protect the open space as public land in perpetuity. And that's been a real problem in other places. The other concern about protection in perpetuity is I know one of the reasons for doing this is getting revenue. And I would make sure that anybody, you know, voting on this for ULURP is to make sure that there are good protections, to make sure that the revenues remain dedicated rather than going into what I think it was the general revenue pit, which means they like are never seen again. And both of these, there's like histories of this happening. So I just think we need to be really super careful about it. The other question, those are comments. My real question is not to get too into the weeds, but what is the area that the FAR is calculated on? Like FAR of 3 is pretty low. I live in Midtown and, you know, we have a lot higher FARs here, but depending on what the base is and how mechanical spaces are treated, that could still be a pretty tall building. And again, Borough President, I know that's an issue for you too.
And the good news is that Claire Newman is kindly on. Claire, do you want to answer the FAR question?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Anne, for your thoughtful questions, and thanks, Gail. The FAR is calculated only on the footprints of the development zones themselves, and so none of the open space is used as part of that calculation. So the 33 acres of development zones are the only things that sort of go into the denominator for that purpose.
Okay. And we can get back to you with more information. We know how to reach you. You know how to reach us. We'd be glad to answer more questions if you want on that specific. Next, Michael.
Okay, I just would like to read off the next 3 speakers are going to be in this order. Leonard Sparagan, Ian McGrath, and Mauricio Gonzalez. So Leonard, you're up first.
Hi, thank you. Longtime stakeholder in New York Harbor and first time caller. I'm one of the teachers at the New York Harbor School for the professional.
We love you, Leonard. Go ahead.
Thank you. A pleasure. I wanted to pitch that we desperately, to fulfill our mission at the New York Harbor School, need a pool.
Yep.
And the area for that pool has to come from somewhere. This is something that benefits all of New York, with over 1,000 miles of coastline in New York Harbor and New York City owning about 675 of that. The concept that our school can help with the environmental center, the fact that our program having a pool would benefit all of New York. Right now, as it stands, I have students who are losing 7 to 9 hours a week traveling back and forth to a pool, time that could be spent studying, doing homework. This pool would also allow us to start growing our own crop of lifeguards for New York City pools for the beaches. And I used to be a commercial diver and a commercial diving investigator and inspector. And I'll be the first to tell you, we're still importing divers from the Gulf of Mexico who come here to work for the summer, and then they are gone as soon as the weather gets cold. Instead of training our students, our population, to pick up the slack and continue the work for rehabilitating New York Harbor. It would be in our best interest to.
Leonard, I'm 100% with you. I've already put in borough president capital money, as you know, and I have been a broken record with the trust, as has, I know, Senator Brian Kavanaugh, Councilmember Chin, and everyone else. So we're all focused on getting you a pool. I promise you that. I know that sounds like an empty promise, but it's not. We're really working on it. It makes perfect sense.
Thank you. It does annoy me that most of the students coming out of the harbor school cannot swim.
I know most of your students, so I know, but we are very much on it. It's top of the list, along with composting, ball fields. I don't know, Claire, long list, though, but that's one that is doable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, Michael.
Next up, I have Ian McGrath. You
Okay.
should be able to speak now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Hi, my name's Ian McGrath. I'm the co-president of the PTA at the New York Harbor School, 2 in a row. We, the Harbor School parents, have chosen this school for our children because of the uniquely experiential education it affords. How many kids can get to study ocean engineering like my son is a high school junior? Nor is it every school that stops a school day to go whale watching in the harbor, making observations and taking data readings on the way. As our oceans and their species are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine, please be aware that climate change research has been happening at the Harbor School each and every day for the last decade. I wanted to take some time this evening to share with you a few facts about New York, which every student at the school knows. We call New York Harbor the 6th borough, and while it is widely known that the visible infrastructure of NYC is eroded, fewer understand that the underwater infrastructure has been neglected for a century. To aid, and I think Lenny mentioned this, to aid in the rehabilitation of the harbor's waterborne structures, we're importing divers from around the country, but these divers are leaving when their winter arrives, which and the seasonal shortfall impacts the city from completing work in a timely manner. Similarly, having surpassed Seattle as the #1 city in America for commuting by sea, the water taxis that crisscross our city are manned by pilots imported from the West Coast. Many of the lifeguards that guard the 52 pools and dozens of beaches in New York are imported from Europe, as we don't have enough New Yorkers to fill those well-paid summer jobs. Lastly, only 14% of the millions of dollars worth of jobs connected to the Port of New York are held by New Yorkers. So this city needs to invest in marine and maritime education now. We are asking you and the trust to grant us Building 515 on Governor's Island for the school's expansion, which will allow space for facilities we have long been promised: an aquatic facility, a gym, an auditorium, plus more space for classrooms, facilities you would expect to see at any other high school. While the Harbor School may be relatively new, we have already graduated many students who have successfully pursued careers as sea captains, seamen, biologists, ocean engineers, and professional divers. The Harbor School needs additional facilities to continue to provide the technical foundation our students need to fulfill the highly skilled jobs available here in New York waters. Harbor is growing ever more popular, with 8 open houses filling up instantly, 1,600 prospective 8th graders, 400 on wait lists. In recent years, yes.
Ian, I got it. We're for you.
Great.
We are advocates like you cannot imagine. So,
All right, well, we're so grateful for your support.
no.
We want to fulfill the mission of the school, which is about water, for a city which is on the water.
Yep.
Which,
I
as we
agree.
mentioned before, people forget so easily with the way the city's
I
configured.
have not
Thank you so
forgotten. We love your school.
much. Okay.
Next, Michael.
Thank you. And then the next 3 speakers are going to be Mauricio Gonzalez, Ira Gershenhorn, and Roger Manning. So Mauricio, you're up next.
Okay, hello, Lenny. Hello, Gail. I'm also from the Harbor School, so I'm going to keep it brief because I feel it's unfair now. I think the main concern that I have that I'd like to ask about is about the water quality. And you know, very recently, a lot of our wastewater treatment plants have suffered from fires, and CSOs continue to be an issue, or runoff and hyper sedimentation. You know, folks want to add more boats to the harbor, and all of that increases the sedimentation. So how do we? Does Red Hook, which treats, I believe they're the ones that treat the wastewater coming out of the harbor, out of Governor's Island, does it have the ability to treat the wastewater? You know, if we build more, we're building more bathrooms, using more water. Does that infrastructure exist? I guess I'll keep it there just because, you know, we've already taken up a lot of time.
Well, I appreciate it, but those are good questions that we will make sure we get the answers to. And, you know, figuring out, supposedly this would be the place to do it in terms of climate challenges addressed. But those are really good questions, Mauricio. Thank you. Next, Michael.
All right, next I have Ira Gershenhorn.
Ira, go ahead.
Okay, well, thanks, Gail, for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just want to ask about the financial.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about how Governor's Island is supposed to be self-sufficient, but we don't hear where the money is used. That's
So you're asking if the money that is from, you know, the concessions that are there now, the restaurants there now, and so on, does it stay on the island? Is that your question?
no. I'm asking what makes Governor's Island expensive? What
Okay.
does it cost to run it? Where does the money come from? I mean,
Claire, do you want to answer that? How much it costs to run per year?
Yes, I'm happy to. And we do also have that information publicly available on our presentations on our website. Today, to keep the island open 6 months a year, it costs approximately $20 million. The Trust for Governor's Island is responsible not just for the maintenance of the park, but also the maintenance of all of the historic buildings on the northern part of the island, which are really one of the island's, I think, key treasures, all of the infrastructure that is on the island, in addition to providing ferry service, EMT service, and security service. We do have a pie chart, as I mentioned, on our island that breaks that 20 million down into categories so that you have access to that, Ira.
All right, so it's
Okay,
20 million for 6 years. Ira, go ahead.
Yeah, I've emailed Michael that exact question. So can he send me back that link
Sure.
to where it's stored?
We'd be
Yeah,
glad to.
absolutely. After the presentation, I'm sorry, I can't check my email at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Next, Michael.
Next up is Roger Manning. You should be allowed to speak now.
Roger, go ahead. Roger Manning, go ahead. Maybe he can't unmute.
He's unmuted.
Okay.
I can come back to him. So
Okay. Next.
okay. Next I have Udo Drescher.
Okay, Udo.
I just prompted you to unmute. You have to unmute yourself, but you should be able to speak, Udo.
I was successful. Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Borough President, for the opportunity to comment. For me, as a New Yorker, what makes Governor's Island so special is that it's literally an oasis in the urban desert. And if we think about what makes an oasis different, it's really, it's the land, it's the soil that is a stark contrast to the surrounding area. In the case of Governor's Island, we have really a gem in a built-out urban environment. So I would like the development to keep that in mind. What makes the island special is not just the open space, it's not just the equivalent of Central Park or Waterfront Park, it's also the way it's being used. And it is the fertility of the soil there. The idea of a climate center is fantastic, but I believe one thing people have to keep in mind is also the role that soil management and the waste cycle play in that context. Soil is currently responsible for about 46% of carbon sequestration on the planet. And I think combining that with a closed waste cycle, which is what Earth Matter is trying to propose in collaboration with the Trust for Governor's Island, puts us in a great position there to not only learn and experiment, but also to educate all the New Yorkers from all the boroughs and even people beyond New York City about the importance of waste management and also the importance of soil health. We already submitted comments to you, Madam Borough President, and
Yes.
we appreciate your interest. I would just like to keep the emphasis that we should not just look at the built environment and the opportunities that are within the building envelopes, but also the opportunities that already have been created and that exist in using the land there in ways that are really unique in New York City. Just to add one example, we incorporate animals into our composting cycle, which is something that particularly young children love. And I don't think they have exposure anywhere else in the city to that kind of concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know you have chickens. I love chickens. Okay, who's next, Michael?
Okay, the next three people are Thomas Koza, Sinead Wadsworth, and Andrea Leesky. So Thomas, you're up.
Thomas, go ahead.
I've prompted you to unmute, so you have to unmute yourself, but you should be able to speak, Thomas.
Okay. Hello, Borough President Brewer. My name is Thomas Koza, and I am a freshman at the New York Harbor School.
Go ahead.
I applied to Harvard because I love marine biology, and it has been a long time dream to be a part of the professional diving program. I am so grateful to hear about your support from the Harbor School, and thank you for your pledge to support our desperate need of more space and especially an aquatic training facility. As Lenny said, the diving program would benefit greatly from the pool, but it's not only the diving students. Our ocean engineering students use an inflatable 4 feet deep by 6 foot diameter pool to test their aquatic remotely operated vehicles. Imagine what these students could achieve if they had the space and depth for testing and troubleshooting. Our bio students can train for their water-based projects there as well. Most importantly, all Harbor students need a place to train to swim. When the school was located in Brooklyn, learning to swim was part of the curriculum. Since the school moved to Governor's Island, Harbor can no longer offer swimming instruction, and the swimming is no longer a graduation requirement. Nearly 50% of our students come to Harbor School not knowing how to swim. I believe this is a very important safety issue. Harbor students spend their days in or around the water on and off boats, and it's hard to fathom a maritime school without a pool to train in. In conclusion, I thank you so much for your support in this endeavor, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Michael, who's next?
Up next, I have Sinead, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Sinead Wadsworth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, it's Sinead Wadsworth. Hi, good evening, Borough President Brewer. My name is Sinead Wadsworth. I am a council representative for the New York City District Council of Carpenters. And tonight, I wanted to ask a question about the capital funding in regards to any prevailing wage mandates, and if union career opportunities would be available for this project, because it's major, and after COVID, unemployment is still at an all-time high, and we would just like the opportunity to engage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I assume that it would be a union project, as we say, and I know the carpenters have the best apprenticeship program. Been there to your wonderful Hudson, fabulous apprenticeship place where you do all the carpentry. I love it to death. So I assume this would be a union job. I think Claire probably would agree with that because it's public funds. So as far as I know, it would be 100% union job, and we would love to work with your apprentices in particular. Who is next, Michael?
Next up, I have Andrea Leesky.
Andrea?
Yes, hi. Thanks for letting me speak. I feel that the Climate Solution Center seems to be maybe just a shiny, trendy thing that's really just there to blind us while other things might be pushed through. And I feel like in order to take the idea of the Climate Solution Center, which in general I think might be a great thing, serious, I think that the trust, and to think that the trust is seeing this through with integrity and with honesty, I think we need to see a real commitment from the trust towards this goal. I think as a starter, I think the trust themselves should have actual actually their own sustainability goals and commitments towards climate solutions. I think there should be maybe a public document where we can see their own goals and their commitments that is updated and evaluated continuously, that they have a full-time staff that works towards this, just like any other organization would do that is taking sustainability seriously. And I really don't see this currently be the case. And so I'm just questioning the idea of the climate center solution and how that really will end up what one might think it could be or should be.
Andrea, thank you. So what would you suggest that would give you believability, if that's a word, that the climate was a real goal? Like, would it be an advisory group? Would it be, you know, like you said, a paper that says these are the goals that would be worked into the ULURP process? What would give you the feeling that this was real?
Yeah, I think any and all of these would be really great steps towards that. I mean, I know that there are environmental initiatives on the island, but I don't really see that they're being pushed actually from the trust with the PIF behind it. So yeah, a document, a staff position, a committee, things like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, next.
Okay, the next three speakers are going to be Tammy Meltzer, Kay Samuels, and Wendy Brower. So Tammy, you're up. I've just permitted you to speak.
Thank you, Tammy, for joining us. This is the chair of Community Board 1, and she's phenomenal.
Goodness gracious. Goodness gracious, I appreciate that shout out. So thank you very much. Coming
Absolutely.
from you, that's high praise. Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Tammy Meltzer, and I am chair of Manhattan Community Board 1. While Governor's Island falls within Community District 1, it is an extraordinary public resource for our city, state, and nation. In July of 1997, CB1 testified at a congressional hearing on the future of Governor's Island that we hoped that Governor's Island would be kept as parkland with active, open recreational space. Further, that one thing Community Board 1 does not want to see happen is for Governor's Island to be converted into some kind of private or semi-private area that would prohibit residents and workers and tourists from coming onto the island. This would include residential communities. This sentiment has remained largely unchanged over the past 24 years, as demonstrated by prevailing opinions presented during CB1's review of the Governor's Island ULURP application. CB1 held a public hearing on November 9th, 2020, where dozens of individuals testified, and we further collected about an additional 160 written comments. The majority of the comments have been in opposition to the proposed scale of density and development and in favor of preserving and increasing parkland, open space, connection to the water, and recreation on the island. CB1 has long supported the Trust for Governor's Island, and we recognize the need for a public-private investment to move the Trust's vision forward. On December 24th, 2020, we adopted a resolution to serve as our formal recommendation on this ULURP application. CB1's vote on the application resulted in a no unless all conditions were outlined in the resolution are satisfied. I encourage everyone to review the resolution, which has been carefully crafted after many, many hours of review and deliberation. In the interest of time, I'll only address a handful of our major points. Currently, Governor's Island has a modest urban scale and density. The majority of public comments indicated that it's this existing density and scale that gives the island its unique identity as a refuge in its highly urbanized context. Earlier proposals for the South Island development indicated much less development, which the Trust has indicated was merely conceptual. Most importantly, the public's understanding of the development program was based on these earlier models, and the drastic increase in scale of development is unacceptable. In terms of mass and bulk, the proposed heights are substantially larger than the existing development on the island, and our resolution states that the zoning must be amended to reduce the density, height, and bulk for the development to respond to the many concerns raised by the community. In order to be more consistent with earlier proposals and plans and the existing scale of the buildings on the island, for example, Liggett Hall, the zoning should be amended to cap heights at 125 feet. Another major concern of the proposal is the management and protection of open spaces and parkland. While the open space sub-area defined in the proposed zoning does not generate zoning floor area, zoning still allows uses and structures not typically found in parks, considered as permitted obstructions and exempt from any floor area or coverage restrictions. Buildings and other structures up to 35 feet are allowed when they house permitted uses, and these structures and uses could be included but not limited to large-scale restaurants and bars with entertainment and dining, transit facilities, recreational facilities, including temporary circuses and others. Though the trust has expressed a commitment to scaling back the proposed development allowances within the open space sub-area, it is not enough to afford protection of what was originally intended as parkland. The zoning must redefine open space areas and open space sub-areas as public parkland, including these quote open spaces in the North Island to ensure consistency with the deed's parkland restriction terms. The proposal for the redevelopment on the South Island is extremely complex. The trust maintains that 4.5 million square feet is required in order for the island to become financially self-sustaining. However, the trust has not yet provided the detailed financial modeling of the initial proposed plans as compared to this current proposal. In the absence of detailed financial modeling for this and any alternative scenarios, it is impossible for the public to determine the appropriateness of the current proposal. Further, any financial projections would have been based on pre-COVID trends and modeling. We are in unprecedented times now and in the near future, but there is no telling if or when we might ever return to what is considered a pre-COVID normal. Thus, there's much concern that plans will not actualize in the way that the trust hopes or intends, and that the extremely flexible zoning being proposed will result in exploitative development that destroys the magic of the island, which has inspired so much passion from the public throughout this process. Governor's Island is a true public asset. It deserves the time and attention needed for the plan on the island in a way that allows for both growth and progress, but also protects aspects of the island that so many of us have come to cherish. Most importantly, CB1 wants to thank the trust for their efforts to respond to the concerns raised so far, and we look forward to continuing to work with the trust to preserve the legacy of the island as a beloved public resource and to make the island resilient and sustainable. Together with the trust, our elected officials, and the Department of City Planning, CB1 hopes to ensure that the concerns captured in our resolution and expressed to us by the public throughout this process are addressed. Thank you very much for your time and this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tammy Meltzer, for Community Board 1. And I think that that resolution is on your website, so people can go there to get it. And also for those in the chat and the Q&A who are pointing out that it is citywide island, I'm very aware of that, but it is in the Community Board 1 of Manhattan's purview. So I think they are extremely cognizant of being sort of representing the rest of the city in some ways, but also they've done a phenomenal job of looking at every detail. And that's an incredible resolution. So thank you very much. And we certainly have much agreement in what you're saying, Tammy, and we'll keep pushing. I also mentioned earlier that I hope that Community Board 1 would be part of the process as a real partner. So we'll see where that goes. I feel very strongly about that. Michael, who's next?
Next up, I have Kay Samuels, who will be followed by Wendy Brar and Amanda Yagi.
Okay.
So
Dr.
Kay Samuels.
Dr. Samuels.
Good evening, everyone. I was really happy to hear from the New York Harbor School. It's a phenomenal school, and whatever they're asking for should be given to them. Also, I was happy to hear from the union rep. That lets me know that folks are watching what's going on over there. One of the issues that I have is that Governor's Island, when you get off the boat, there's no shelter. If it's snowing, if it's raining, you're just out there. And I would like to see the trust look into some type of temporary place that someone can wait for whoever may be coming to pick them up. There is no shuttle on the island. And it seems to me that maybe some thought should be put into putting restaurants of different prices on the island. I know we're in a COVID state right now, but hopefully we will be getting out of it relatively soon. To put restaurants with different prices and a shuttle on the island. I'm concerned, that's just an idea. I'm concerned about the fact that an expensive sauna and exercise club appears to be being built on the island. And I'm concerned about that because it almost sends a signal that the island may be only for rich people. So this is something I think should be discussed. And yes, the island, I feel, belongs to all of New York City, whether or not it is harbored or connected with Community Board 1. And I don't know, I came on a little bit late. Was there anybody of color on the panel?
Yes, there were two. I saw your note in the chat, Dr. Samuels. Yes, first African-American man and a Latino man.
Okay, just checking.
Yes, I know you, but yes, absolutely.
You know I'm a check.
Yes, I know. She and I go way back. We're usually at board 10 together, just so the public knows. Thank you, Dr. Samuels.
Okay.
Thank you. And Wendy's next?
That's correct.
Thank you. Hello. I'd like to ask if we could pause on the new buildings while the pandemic is making fresh air a health imperative, especially during the years when East River Park and the Esplanade to the seaport are under construction, impacting 100,000 Lower East Siders. Let's develop the projects and buildings that are already on Governor's Island now to support climate change, adaptation, and green culture, the circular economy, composting, and food security. Let's add a public bike-based development lab, a water and swim center, an ecotourism hub, and other other cost-effective innovations like a street tree farm that cultivates green jobs and stewardship skills that will benefit the whole city. Give it 10 or 15 years of support to blossom before building. Please protect our country place in the city. This is the last bit of green we have. It's so vital to wildlife as it's also on the Atlantic Flyway, and really to all New Yorkers, especially low income and vulnerable people and future generations. Think what they'll have in access to and how important it is to protect a precious bit of green. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for all your work in many environmental and other causes. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gail. And can I just mention that Roger Manning, who was called on earlier, has said in the chat that his mic is working again. And I hope it can be added to the queue.
I see him. Yep, I have him up. So he's coming up.
Yep.
I'll add Roger next, just
okay,
because he came in before.
So he should go now, Michael?
Roger, go ahead. I just unmuted you.
Yep.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, terrific. Thanks. Fortunately, CB1 said a lot of the stuff I was going to say, so that's really fabulous. Thanks, Tammy. It's such great work. Although the one thing is, I'm not so sure that the top of Liggett Hall's steeple is 125 feet high. In any case, I'm working on that. You know, a couple of things really, if I can get my thoughts together, because now I'm thrown off. Oh yes, the sewage and the water treatment. Somebody from the Voice of Gowanus is a community group that's fighting rezoning out there, pointed out that their neighborhood uses the same sewage treatment system in Red Hook, and that you know, they're wondering if it can really handle increased load from Governor's Island. And also, it's important to make a point that these remote meetings are inadequate for the ULIP process. Even though I know people are trying, as the Voice of Gowanus actually has succeeded in getting a legal injunction against the Europe process for that reason right now. They've paused the process and due to a court decision. Yeah, actually, I'll just point out that I'm one of the co-founders of the Metro Area Governors Island Coalition, MAGIC, and I'll post the website URL in the chat after I'm done. And a lot of the information from Community Board 1's resolution, we have that all posted on our website, and there's a lot of stuff there. And the thing that I've come up with more recently is a sort of better development approach for Governor's Island South area. I did post that in the chat, and I'll just touch on it. For example, the Western Development Zone in the South Island area, and the idea is to not put buildings there, to create an outdoor events / athletic area, because Governor's Island puts on these big outdoor events where they have in the past, and it brings in income. And where are they going to do that now? They had the horse jumping event last year, and it's totally messed up the lawns and the play fields in South Island. And well, anyhow, this could be a place where they have that, and when they're not having outdoor events and raising money, then it could be converted to an athletic area of some kind, maybe a running track or something, where the surface kind of works out well enough that way. And in the Eastern Zone, it's to keep it like a low-rise development approach, sort of like applying a Frank Lloyd Wright organic architecture type approach, designing in harmony with the surrounding environment of the parklands and historic district. Where buildings seem to be part of the terrain, just all kinds of ideas there. We'll be sending stuff out, or I'll be sending stuff out, so you can take a look at that in more detail. And financially, I mean, the main rationale for building tall buildings and stuff on Governor's Island is because that's what attracts these developers who have the money. And this developer first approach is not good. And in fact, financial self-sufficiency wouldn't be achieved till 2050, according to the Trust for Governor's Island's information. And as the Community Board 1 points out, there's no mandate in the deed that notes that the trust must become financially self-sustaining. I mean, you got to get money, but it's not required to be self-sustaining financially. Anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. We're listening carefully. Thank you.
We'll send you stuff.
Okay, Michael, who's next?
Yes, and I just wanted to repeat, in the chat is my email address if you'd like to provide additional written testimony. So I'll post that again in a minute so you have a chance to do that. So next up, I have Amanda Yagi. Amanda, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just a stakeholder in the sense of being a resident who enjoys Governor's Island, with a niece and nephew who enjoy Governor's Island, and in the state that it currently exists. So thank you to Community Board 1 for making that clear, that what we all love about it is actually the open space, which is so encroached upon by this plan. And a lot of my concerns have already been addressed. So I guess I'll just point out that as Ms. Burr was saying, New Yorkers are suspicious and hostile because to ideas like this, because for instance, I live in Harlem where our EB5 investor money got used to build a Hudson Yards and its accompanying sculpture that's closed to the public indefinitely, for instance. From a climate perspective, we have a lot of available already built, not open space waterfront where we could put a climate change study institute, a lot of it on the west side where Columbia is. and we could preserve our open space. I don't believe that it's necessary to build a hotel, a conference center. I don't think that pavement, steel, glass, construction, diesel trucks, I don't think these things are what the climate crisis actually wants from us. I'm just putting it out there. That maybe adaptive reuse is more what we're looking for as far as the built space goes. And that we need to preserve our existing park space, green space, and air. That's all, thanks.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Michael, who's next?
The next three speakers are going to be Andrew Zelter, Ali and Chris Ryan, and Emily Hellstrom. So next up is Andrew. Andrew, go ahead. You can unmute yourself now and speak.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Madam Borough President, panelists, the team from Governor's Island, thanks so much for your participation throughout this process and bringing this forum together tonight. My name is Andrew Zelter. I'm a member of CB1. I'm part of the team that helped runs Downtown Little League, and I'm a father of 4 children who have grown up in Lower Manhattan. I agree wholeheartedly with the comments that Governor's Island has been a special place to all of us. I think one of the reasons why it's special, particularly in the context of this evening, is that its size and footprint provides us a unique opportunity to reimagine the island such that it can deliver even more enhanced assets that we know are badly needed by the residents of the city. From my perspective, and I'm just expressing a personal view, I think in its current state, there's quite a bit of unrealized potential to deliver community assets and services. And as we know, the ability to reimagine or redesign the island and support the objectives of creating a year-round destination as articulated by the Trust requires a sustainable long-term funding mechanism. And I agree again wholeheartedly with the comments that to have to turn to commercial development and private funding to help support public space is something we'd all prefer to avoid. But I have come to begrudgingly accept that unfortunately this seems to be our reality. And the reason I have come to accept that is that this discussion about self-sustainability and funding is not unique to Governor's Island. As Gail and many others on this phone call will know, this has been an ongoing discussion with Hudson River Park Trust as it relates to one of their crown jewels, Pier 40, the 15-acre pier that is currently a low-rise building that I believe spans 3 to 4 city blocks and again is underutilized in terms of its potential as well as blocking view corridors. And again, as those who have been involved know, we've been at the table now for more than a decade trying to solve the funding challenge to be able to redevelop and redesign Pier 40. And that challenge has largely met the impediments of the struggles to get our heads around private funding for public spaces, high-rise buildings in public space. And I just hope that we do find a landing place on this issue that does provide flexibility. And for me, flexibility is defined as the ability for the trust to issue an RFP that will check all of the boxes, those being community concerns, but also the need for financial revenue. I would hate for us to lose 10 plus years going through the same process we have with Hudson River Park Trust, only coming back to what ultimately seems to be the solution for this, which we've done 3 or 4 times with Hudson River Park, talking about a commercial development to bring in funding. So it's my hope we find a path forward. And again, that creates an environment for issuing an RFP that will elicit appropriate responses. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. Michael,
Next up, I have Ali and Chris Ryan.
Okay.
Go ahead. Ali or Chris, go ahead. You're unmuted and ready to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Manhattan Borough President Brewer, Claire Newman, and the Trust of Governor's Island, and the panelists who spoke tonight. I am speaking as both a New Yorker, a wife, and a mother of 2 children, of elementary school age children, and as a co-founder of Metro Area Governors Island Coalition. Governors Island is very dear to my family. My husband and I got married on Governors Island 10 years ago on Talk Like a Pirate Day, when everybody came to the island dressed as pirates. In fact, I got kidnapped by pirates during my wedding ceremony for fun. So that's what leads me here today to share with every single person I meet what is going on Governor's Island. I must admit, as an East Village resident, I am very distrustful of the URLIP process because what has happened to the East Side Resiliency Plan and that East River Park is going to be closing sometime this spring, partially closed for 5 years, which is basically my children's childhood. So with that in mind, I have several questions to ask, and also statements, but both the Trust for Governors Island Board and the Friends of Governors Island is mostly comprised by representatives of major developers around the city. Why has not a conservationist or a gardener been appointed to the Trust for Governors Island's board and to the Friends of Governors Island? Number 2, has a geology study been conducted to see what the island can support structurally? I ask this because the southern end of the island is comprised of landfill. And thirdly, has the city of New York and the de Blasio administration taken into consideration the premise that the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project set forth that East River Park be closed for demolition and to be raised for at least 8 to 10 feet because East River Park is a floodplain? At the Trust's November 2nd presentation to CB1, it clearly shows in the presentation that the proposed areas for development on Governor's Island are on a floodplain, and the proposed Trust building timeline overlaps with East River Park's partial closures. How does the city justify removing 2 actively and heavily used parks from public use at the same time in post-COVID-19 lockdown, and especially when the mayor and the governor like to threaten impending lockdowns for New York City frequently? And obviously, as we constantly hear, science has shown that people need outdoor space to survive lockdowns. As great as the Open Streets program is, it does not adequately replace these 2 parklands. Thank you very much.
Ali, thank you, Gail Brewer. I can do a little, and then we'll have to get back to you. In terms of the East River Park, obviously I'm very familiar. As you know, we even hired somebody in the community. We paid for him to come from Holland to give some analysis. But I will say that the one aspect of the park that Governor's Island could pick up on is the ball fields for the leagues and the public school students. So we're trying to work that out so that you continue to have a full place to participate in terms of athletics. That's very important to all of us. And I don't know, I can't answer the board issue, to be honest with you. And I can't, although we will have a representative on the board, I believe, and I believe the council member does also. So we're certainly not real estate people, but we will, I can get back to you about that. In terms of the geology study, I have to get back to you also because I don't know the answer. The ULIP process is very extensive in terms of these issues, but they're mostly focused on mitigation. So you can have, I've been through many, many, many ULIPs, and of course you can have a challenge, and then how do you mitigate it? Sometimes you can't. So why don't we get back to you about those issues? But I appreciate them very much. But I am very aware of the park needing, East River Park needing places to go when it is closed. Governor's Island will still be very much open that time period. So we'll get back to you about those issues. Michael, who's next? And we don't have a lot of time left, so go ahead, Michael.
Okay, next up is Emily Hellstrom.
Okay.
Emily, go ahead.
Emily, can you hear us?
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next person, and if Emily comes back, we'll.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, next up is Alex Stachelberg. Alex, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on today. I am sorry to be yet another Harbor School representative. I am a parent of a sophomore at the Harbor School. I want to speak on our behalf, first of all, to you, Borough President, to let you know that we actually do appreciate and know that you are in our corner. We are on here tonight in large part because we are asking for something very specific that we're not sure everybody has heard us ask for. We believe that the hospital building, which is right next to the Harbor School, where it physically lies, is the best solution for all of our problems, including classroom space, a gym, auditorium, as well as an aquatic training center. And we want to emphasize that we are a climate change school. The Governor's Island Trust has been emphasizing over and over again that they are looking for that kind of a partnership. We are their partner, and we are already there for 11 years. And in those 11 years, we have not been given the space for our school to actually have the basic facilities that most every school has. Whether it's DOE or the Governor's Island Trust, it has not been effective. Our school is without the facilities it needs. And furthermore, we have MOUs with CUNY as well as other colleges that would like to help us develop a school that is a 9 to 14 school, which would allow people to have associate's degrees. Coming out of Harbor School with an associate's degree is significant, especially for the population that is part of the Harbor School student body. We are talking about major changes that our school could have for the better that would better New York City. This is big. This is not small and all about just one little public school needing a swimming pool. This is actually bigger than that, and it really does suit and meet the needs that Governor's Island says they want to meet. In part, we understand that this is a financial issue. We support and encourage them to find solutions. We hope those solutions don't affect the building that we are currently in. We have heard that there may be a giant building built right next to the Harbor School, which that could have very negative impact on our school on lots of levels. But in any case, whatever is going to happen going forward, we need the Department of Education as well as Governor's Island Trust to come together and actually make a commitment on paper to our school. And that commitment we're asking for is the hospital building because it meets all our needs.
Alice, thank you. We will work on this. I'm very aware of it, and we will definitely work on it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who's next, Michael? We got 7 more people, so go ahead.
Isaac Daniel Astrachan. And please, if you could, everyone try to keep your comments to 2 minutes if possible. So
Isaac, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Gail, thank you very much. You've mentioned fields several times, so I'll be very quick. As we know, and I'm representing Champions and Downtown United Soccer Club. As we know, we have a deficit of field space downtown, and the upcoming closure of the fields on the East River will make matters worse. Turfing and lighting the existing fields on Governor's Island, along with more after-school ferry service, would be a good first step to address this particular issue with a minimal investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaac, very much. Michael, who's next?
Next up, I have Richard Corman, followed by Doric Lee and Amy Koth.
Richard, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well.
Hi, thank you, Madam Borough President and the panel. I appreciate that. I'm Richard Corman, President of Downtown Independent Democrats, and I'm speaking about a resolution that we passed on December 7th. The membership passed a resolution urging the rejection of the Governor's Island plan for its rezoning and development, and to reprioritize public space in any future development proposal. I won't go into much of what we said because so much of it was said very, very well by Tammy and the CB1 proposal. We did refer, as Tammy did, to the financial issues and the lack of disclosure that we unfortunately have seen in terms of how the money is to be used, why it's necessary, and we know that in fact it's not required by the deed. The plan calls for the public to cede forever a substantial, unique, and desperately needed amount of public space directly adjacent to a National Historic District and in a 1% coastal floodplain, justified by an unclear financial need. That's the lack of financial disclosure, an uncertain gain to the public, and there is potential large taxpayer cost, which really hasn't been outlined very clearly as well. We've asked the city to reject the plan and reassess this and any future development proposal to reflect a reprioritization such that public open space and the ability for the public to enjoy and appreciate this unique island in our harbor takes precedence over real estate development. I want to add, and certainly what we would want to have is any development would reflect a low rise and minimal bulk provisions that would minimize any impact to the public enjoyment of the space. I want to emphasize one of the things that Mr. Tollerson said about being outfoxed by market forces. I think what we're doing here is going about this in the standard way, but I think a backwards way. We're creating a zoning opportunity without a real zoning plan. Without a plan, there is no tenant here. There's no clear plan for what the climate center solution will be. We should have a plan before we approve the zoning. Once it's approved, the opportunity to be outfoxed by the real estate forces, by market forces, by the pressure of money will be very great. And we know that if it can happen all too often in this town, it will happen.
Okay.
So I would recommend, and our membership recommends, that we take a step back from this, that we look at this, we look at development and reprioritize for public space and make sure we have a clear plan in place before we go forward with any opportunistic zoning.
All right, Richard, thank you very much. Okay, next, Michael.
Next up, I have Doric Lee. Doric, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Doric Lee, and I am a teacher also at the New York Harbor School. And I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm also a resident of Red Hook, so I feel like I kind of have a double stake in Governor's Island. And I just want to speak a little bit about emerging industry. With one of the largest wind farms planned to be built within the next 5 to 10 years, just offshore of Coney Island, New York is poised to have a completely new industry that a lot of people I don't think have quite realized or even quite imagined. And I just want to say that, like, you know, any partnership or any planning that's done at the ground floor right now needs to include some type of partnership with this nascent industry. And what I'm envisioning is that any post-secondary institution must have some aspect of training for these new green and blue careers that are going to be emerging as we build infrastructure to counteract or to kind of work within the pressures of climate change. There are three things I just want to speak to that this would benefit. First, I've been listening to the panelists, and in terms of like an authentic direct effect on New York City residents, there's no more direct effect than employment. And it's not just merely recreation. Like, there are ways that this can actually be turning keyed into careers. and partnerships with an industry that is at the scale of the energy industry can kind of like maybe offset the pressures of development and maybe help bundle the costs of maintenance and construction of these new facilities. And also, I guess, any climate center needs to not just include research, but it should also include a practical and potent focus on climate solutions. And I think that, providing infrastructure and providing infrastructure solutions should somehow be intertwined with the mission of any post-secondary institution that ends up on Governor's Island. So that's what I have to say.
Excellent ideas. That students are lucky to have you there. My goodness. Michael, who's next?
Okay, the last three speakers of the night are going to be Amy Koth, followed by Stacy Shun, followed by Emily Hellstrom. So Amy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Borough President, greatly appreciate your presence recently at the Vigil Against Hate at the Heritage Museum against the Holocaust here in Battery Park City. I was present, so thank you for that. Off topic, but number one, Tammy Meltzer very well covered eloquently as always many of my issues as a Lower Manhattan resident. I am a Battery Park City resident who can see the hills from the time that the buildings were imploded to build them on Governor's Island to right now. And having watched them erode over time, I have grave concern over the idea of high rises or other buildings being built on the island, because I have read about what the hills and how they were built to prevent against erosion, but they are indeed not the height that they were previously. So more development gives me great pause. In terms of the climate center, and Rick Lee just expounded on that, and other people have as well. Between the Billy Oyster Project, the Harbor School, the Hudson River Park Trust, the Waterfront Alliance, many others just on the Manhattan Island, much less Brooklyn, Queens, etc. Long Island City has done tremendous development. It would seem that there could be an organic growth between all of those institutions that have already there to help preserve our waters and our climate. That should be, maybe that should be the center. Maybe they should be able to go to Governor's Island and meet in the open spaces and near the waters to decide what the next phase of climate change and climate center should be, and that Governor's Island is that oasis for that open thought. So I would just encourage that before another new iteration of climate change and climate center is built, we just embrace what we have, because I think what we have is wonderful. And I am, full disclosure, a Harbor parent, but I'm not going to go into that. But what they do in partnership, as every other organization studying this, should be embraced, and I think should be encouraged to come together on Governor's Island rather than build something new. Let's build what we have further and let the Trust for Governor's Island lead the way in that direction, but not with buildings, not the rezoning, but conceptually. So also, just to the point also about the infrastructure, again, Mauricio had addressed that as well. I think that's a big concern as well. With the rezoning plans, infrastructure is key. Ambulances, hospitals, how do people get help who are in buildings, who are in hotels, et cetera, as well as plumbing, water. Those are all key points in the rezoning from a structural standpoint. So that's what I have to say. And also from a revenue standpoint, my sons have been ball shaggers for the last 3 years prior to the COVID cancellation of the AVP professional volleyball tournament, beach volleyball. And they're crammed on piers. They're wonderful events, but I could see the potential for income generation on Governor's Island for sporting events like that, where they could have more space. There could be much more encouragement of interaction. And I'm sure there are other sports that could do that equally. So I'm sure there's other possibilities. So I thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Next, Michael.
Next up is Stacy Shun. Stacy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Madam Borough President, for asking for community input. It is, of course, always appreciated. Governor's Island is one of the few places left that my family can still go to get away from it all. A place with very open space and open sky, because Lord knows there's not much of that left downtown. I am so saddened to think that yet another irreplaceable jewel may be lost forever. Every year, my daughter and I dress up in our tutus and wings and ride the ferry to attend Figment with a host of multi-ethnic, multi-age people of every economic background, with fairy dust and bubbles. I disagree that we need to have restaurants of all price points, hotel, and all the commercialization that will surely come. This type of special space with walking and bicycles is irreplaceable. Why must every blade of grass and every tree be, quote, activated and, quote, contributing? They are already, as grass and trees. And although a climate center is laudable, I echo the last speaker when she says that there are better locations for these structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, who's next?
Next up, I have Emily Hellstrom, followed by Merritt Birnbaum and Carol Astley. And those are the rest of the speakers I have.
Okay, Emily, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you, Borough President Brewer, for hosting this. And community input is sort of one of the bedrocks of our democracy. And I also would say that so is the public realm. I'm a believer in public schools, in public libraries, and in public open space. And I am very, very nervous when we meld the public and private partnerships. It's become sort of the way that we do business here in the United States. And I've seen other countries who don't do it that way. And they end up with spaces that are open and preserved and beautiful for everyone to use. And I think that we have to dedicate ourselves to finding ways for paying for open space without pitting it against other public realms like public schools and public pools and libraries and you know, these are the things that we cherish and that we need. And when we muddy them and mix them with private partnerships, the private ends up winning. They end up usurping. I know, Gail, that you are dedicated absolutely to the public realm and you are a loyal servant to open space, schools, the things that we cherish, but you will not always be there. And I think that we have to go slowly. I think we have to take our time. We know that there's a pandemic. We know that there is incredible financial pressure right now to make sure that there are money-making situations for our city. And I understand that pressure, but in rushing, we may lose the things that we value the most. So I would just say we must go slowly and we must preserve our open public spaces. It is our civic duty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Next is Merritt Birnbaum. Merritt, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Borough President Brewer, and everyone from the Trust for your great comments and throughout this process. I know that you are all extreme advocates and have the island's best interest at heart. I think tonight's conversation has been really balanced and productive. So I want to really thank the Borough President for leading us in this direction. I want to speak. I am the executive director of the Friends of Governor's Island, formerly the Governor's Island Alliance. And we've given testimony at the previous hearings on the topic, so I won't rehash a lot of the points that we've made before, but just to say that we are very much in favor of rezoning the South Island, not only because we find nothing in the current proposal that is at odds with the original vision of the deed transfer that our organization helped create back in the 90s. But also because, you know, I've heard many people who oppose the rezoning who seem to discount the benefit of increasing ferry service and access to the island year round. So I did want to add that on a personal note, I really feel that it is a tragedy that the island is only open 6 months out of the year. You know, I'm one of the fortunate people who has the opportunity to work year round on the island. And there isn't a day between November 1st and May 1st when I don't regret that I'm there and the island is empty of public visitors on those days. And the reason for this is because that unlike a typical park that we see in the city, running Governor's Island costs real money. And not to be too dire, I know that, you know, we'll send more information afterwards and the trust will follow up with the financial projections. But, you know, New York City is on the verge of bankruptcy. And as we come out of COVID, we need to be looking at revenue models that are going to lead to a long-term financial sustainability in so many areas, including things like Governor's Island. You know, the trust, as was mentioned, is wholly responsible for running the public transportation network, the public utility system, the public marine infrastructure, the facilities, and the parkland. And access to the park isn't possible without all of these other services, which are operating at a bare minimum right now and actually do require a lot more investment than the current $20 million to see the type of park and access we'd like to see available on Governor's Island. And while the majority of the other parks out there are raising their funding from people who live within 2 blocks of the park, Governor's Island isn't adjacent to a particular neighborhood where we have that philanthropic support that's coming from the people who live immediately next to it. So speaking as the organization that has been working to generate private fundraising for the island, it's been a real struggle. And of our current, as the Friends, $1.75 million budget, we have less than 10% that's coming from individual donors. And I just want to underscore the fact that I think that this proposal makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that it's being fine-tuned and that the community has input in the size and scope of the development. But I think ultimately the rezoning is so critical and necessary. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for all of your work on Governor's Island also. Michael, is that it, or is there somebody else?
The last person is Carol Ashley. Carol, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can, okay. So good evening and thank you. Well, I completely disagree with the last speaker. I agree with everybody who feels very strongly that we have to preserve this island as much as possible as it is, because it is absolutely a respite from the city. So to bring the city to the island would be just a disaster. And I think we also have a tendency to over-design our public spaces, like some of the piers downtown where I live. They spent millions redesigning them, and I don't think that really added very much, frankly. And I really fear that Governor's Island will become a kind of theme park if private interests get their hands on it. But one thing I can't understand is why all these fine old buildings can't be restored. I know it would be a lot of work and there's probably asbestos and all kinds of complications, but I don't see why it would be impossible. I mean, there's masses of buildings there and they're going to fall to pieces as some of them already are. Okay. I completely support the development of the school, the school getting more space, getting a pool, and the existing things. Earth Matters is wonderful. The $1 billion oyster project, all those things that are already on the island are fabulous. And I think we have to somehow raise money from, like raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers, or raise taxes with the transactions on the stock exchange, the other things that have been suggested. We could make a lot of money that way for the city. And I don't understand why it always has to be something taken from the people who already have the least, like the people who live in cramped apartments and in polluted neighborhoods. A place like Governor's Island is a day in the country for them. They don't have access to a country house. And I think that's something really, really important to consider.
Okay. Carol, thank you very much. Just so you know, in terms of the revenue from whatever increase in taxes on anybody, that has to go to the general fund. Now, that doesn't mean that we do or don't rezone, but I just want to let you know that by law has to go to the general fund. So
right.
That money may not, you can always allocate it somewhere. That's a different story. Yeah. Just so you know, that money is not going to go directly to Roosevelt, to Governor's Island by law. So I think that's it, Michael. I want to thank you and the staff of the Manhattan Borough President's Office, the amazing panelists, everybody who spoke. And I hope that people will stay involved. We take your comments very, very, very seriously. I don't need to reiterate what was said over and over again, which is how important Governor's Island is to the 5 boroughs, certainly to the Community Board 1 deliberations, and to the Borough President, City Council, Mayor's Office. And we're going to keep pushing to try to accommodate the many comments that were made. I think many of you know how I feel about this, but it's a collaborative process. I'm not the only voice, but I thank you because we wanted to do this hearing to, supplement, complement some of the other discussions, because this is very free flowing and people are certainly free to say what they wish. And I hope that people have done that. So thank you very much. I would keep talking all night, but now I have a Community Board 8 meeting to go to. Thank you and good night, everyone.